Okay. The very first thing you would do before processing, obviously, is we receive our samples. So Dr. Chin and Dr. Hong have started using these cell culture boxes, or these specimen culture things, because it's been easier to get the samples out without damaging your epidermal equivalents, the cell layers through the meniscus of the liquid fixative. Anyway, I always enter in the samples on some type of log, and I recommend that everybody do this with every sample they process. And make your log clear enough that you have the specific samples and the date that you processed it. And the reason for that is, and in fact we've come across that here in this lab, was occasionally the samples come out dry, or there's a question of whether it was a processing error or whether it was a sample preparation error or fixation error. You may even want to add to this some times of fixation just for your own information. We've had samples that have come out with some problems, and we've referred back to this log to say, well, we processed, let's say, Dr. Chin's samples, and we processed, let's say, Shilpa's samples, or Leonid's from the Dr. Denning lab, and we can say, well, their samples didn't have a problem, but yours did. And they were processed the exact same day, which leads us to believe that it's not a processing error. And it's just through the process of elimination, this log will really, really help you. I highly recommend that everybody do this with every single sample. And then you can have the date it was embedded, the date it was cut, and stuff like that. And, you know, it's just a really good thing. Okay, I'm going to take these samples over to the processor, and we'll get started. Okay, I wanted to show you a little bit about preparing for microtoming. The first thing I do is I always kept the switch on, but you can turn the switch off, whatever. You just want to make sure the switch is on. I fill up the water. Fill this up with DI water or RO water. I fill this up all the way because I'm going to use some of this water when I'm microtoming. Also, I'm going to use it for the crushed ice. So you want to have just some of the extra water. You do not use tap water, only RO or DI water. If you're doing RNA studies and you're doing RNA laser cell capture and you're going to do microtoming for RNA, you want to have this completely clean, completely RNase zapped and wiped. RNase zap and wipe this whole unit. Of course, wear gloves, never touch your hair, and the type of water you're going to want to use is DEPC water, or Invitrogen has RNase-free water. But since you don't do that very often, but that's for your own information. For our purposes, general purposes in immunohistochemistry and routine staining, we're just going to fill this. I actually fill this completely. I don't, you know, over time it evaporates somewhat, and it just helps me to pick up with the slides. So I fill it and actually leave a little bit of a meniscus on top. And I save the rest of this for later for my ice. And I plug the machine in, and I make sure the switch is on. I also have this timer. I have this set at the correct water temperature, and I wrote it in black ink here to line up the notch. That seems to work really well for these epidermal equivalent samples, that particular water temperature. You can take a, you know, you can make it hotter or cooler as your needs for your samples. Different types of tissue will need different types of water temperature. For instance, brain tissue would use a very, very cool water temperature, and things like bone or muscle or liver may use slightly higher water temperature. I have it set exactly right for your samples. This is a slide holder that I kind of gather the slides on as we're going. This is our AO microtome. It's an oldie but goodie. This AO microtome has a few little quirks with it that every time you use this microtome, you need to oil it. I have this that actually came with the microtome. You open it up. This was actually in the top of the microtome at one point, and I've taken it out. And this here shows you where to oil this microtome, and has it very clearly marked. For me, I'm not using oil because this microtome, when it came to us, had very old yellow grease in it. So I'm choosing to use WD-40. There's other brands, but this is the one I use. And the reason I tend to use this is over time I'm trying to get some of that old residual grease and other stuff off, and this helps clean that. So I lubricate this with this thing. There's also, you don't need to remove this, I'm just showing you for this purpose. There's also a slide underneath here that makes this unit. Now you don't want to pull this chuck, but you can pull behind here, this round part, and you can pull, and you want this to move freely. As an example, a not very well oiled one like this old one over here, this would not move freely. It wants to stick, and you can almost not even move it at all, and it wants to stay. So that's not oiled and not good. Ours, on the other hand, we keep well oiled, and it has a nice movement and slides back nicely. So, and that's because I keep it oiled, and I oil it every single use, before every use, or every day. I also don't like to you don't want any oil in this water bath, and you do not want any oil on the blade holder itself. If you get oil in the water bath, of course it's going to affect your samples. And if you get any oil on this whatsoever, you won't get a ribbon. It just won't ribbon for you, and it'll be quite frustrating. And that's even just because it's got the slightest bit of oil on this particular thing. This also, here occasionally, you don't want it to get rusty from water that may drip down as you're bringing the samples back and forth. So once in a while, I kind of remember to oil or grease this a little bit too. Maybe like once a month or so. It's really not complicated. Once you get used to this, maybe about 2 minutes, you can have this all completely oiled and done. I'm just going into great detail for these purposes. I don't like to get oil all over the place, so I'm going to lock this flywheel. So it's locked in place right now. I also like to tuck in some paper towels around here because I don't want oil all over the bottom and stuff. And since I just kind of like to spray freely into these different holes, I don't want to mess everywhere. So maybe that's overkill, but then it doesn't get oil in places that you don't want it. I'll just kind of tuck some paper down and around there. We also have regular Microtome Oil, and at some point you may want to start using that. Probably for the next year or so, I would like to keep using the WD-40 because I'm trying to get rid of that residual grease, because this Microtome actually was as stiff as that one, and it's not any longer. But we have this regular Microtome Oil, and you would do the same things by putting drops of oil in these different holes and on this slide and trying to get some oil down in. It's actually easier with the straw on this. I see that this is moving, so I'm going to give it a squirt even though it's outside the hole. And I give a squirt in there. There's a hole. There's a hidden hole back here. There's a little hole right here. This is a slide. When it goes up and down, you can see that this slides along this smooth area here. I give that a little squirt. I give this a squirt. There's a hole hidden underneath a spring under here, which you'll see on the paper. I give that a little squirt. There's 2 holes here, one there, one there. I give them little squirts. This is a moving part here, so I like to give that a little bit too. You get the general idea. Then I kind of wipe things up a little bit. I don't want all that residual oil everywhere. There's no sense in that. We don't want oil where we don't want it to be. And that's it. This microtome has a locking mechanism. Whenever you change the blade or switch out specimens, I recommend that for safety reasons you use the locking mechanism. That's this here. This is called the flywheel. The locking mechanism is on the flywheel and it's locked. You don't need to yank it. I mean, it's only a little spring holding it. You don't want to break it. That one got broke on the other old microtome. It just prevents it from coming down and cutting your finger. This is called the chuck holder. Our chuck holder will hold our blocks only in one of 2 ways. It'll hold it this way, or you can flip the block around this way. So you leverage the chuck holder with your thumb here, and you pull it with your fingers here. And then you can put the block in. So you leverage it with your thumb here, and you pull it with 1 or 2 fingers forward, and you can remove it and release. Again, you leverage it with your thumb here in the front, and your fingers, pull it forward, and you can put the chuck in. Make sure it's nice and straight, because you can get it kind of crooked like this, and then you can chunk your block and have a problem. It's very easy to do that. So make sure you get it in, centered, and fully released, and it's in there nicely. There is a danger in getting your finger cut by the blade, and that's why I recommend having this locked. And when you remove specimens, for sure have that locked. If you really are concerned, you can remove the blade between each block. I don't do that, but if you want it to be 100% safety orientated, you could do that. This is called the blade holder. Now, it has 2 screws in the front. And this is the Microtome blade. We use a high profile Microtome blade. We happen to use AccuEdge. We found that brand really has served us nicely. It doesn't have a coating and gives us very nice sections. For getting good quality sections, I use a fresh blade every time. I can probably, on a full medium sized block of this type, I can probably get I don't know, I get several sections. You kind of judge that on whether you're starting to see lines or paraffin buildup or whatever, whether you need to move the blade over. I would say a good 20 to 30 sections per blade easily to get quality sections. You just learn to judge that, and by looking at your sections and the quality you're getting. Then once I get my full sections, I save that blade, and then later on I'll use it for facing and discard it at that point. This is a container of crushed ice, and I use that for after I face the blocks. I actually put water in it, and as I face the blocks and I put the blocks. For the oncotypic cultures or epidermal equivalents, they tend to like quite a bit of soaking. It's not that they're dry, they just cut nicer with less chatter and stuff like that. So I face probably 20 or 30 of them, and one at a time get them lined up in this water soaked ice. For now, I'm not going to put the water in it because I have some more things to show you, but I just wanted to show you. I go down to the machine and get the crushed ice. You can use ice cubes, you can use a frozen tray of ice and put water on top of it, whatever your decision is. And that's why I was saving this extra water from the water bath and filled this container up all the way. So we've oiled our machine and it's running smoothly. This is the flywheel. I want to show you on this side of the machine over here. This is called the advance and retract wheel, and this advances and retracts this the block chuck. So I'll put this in, leverage it with my thumb, use my fingers, put the block in nicely, and I'm going to retract this. So if you have this in this position, you can retract it or advance it, or this position. If you're in this position, there's a point where if you're in the wrong position and it wants to grind or anything like that, stop. Do not let it do that. You're in the wrong position and you're actually grinding the gears. So you want it past that point, just a little past or beyond. See, then it goes nicely. You don't hear that grinding noise. Or you can have it here and you don't hear the grinding noise. Okay, if you start hearing grinding, stop. Move the flywheel back or forward a little bit. Before you get your block in, you want to kind of, well, at any point, you want to try to retract that to where it's not going to come down the blade and you can chunk your block. So, some other things. I started to talk about this knife holder. Again, this knife holder has 2 screws. That's actually for tightening. You really shouldn't have to mess with those screws too much. I've marked a little tiny green mark where you need to align that screw for the seams for the optimal cutting tightness. Nothing on this machine, everything should be finger tightened nicely. And you can just quickly check that. Everything should be just little. You should never have to tighten and crank something really hard. If you do that, you're just damaging the machine, and it's not going to give you good sectional results. It's just really a bad thing to do to super tighten something to that extent. Just a little finger tightening is always enough. I'm going to, just for our purposes, I'm going to use one of our facing blades just to show you how to face and show you how to lock the knife. This is our knife clamp lever on the knife holder. This lever right here actually moves the whole knife holder if you want to clean it or whatever. I like to keep a piece of gauze here, and it kind of keeps all that paraffin and junk, and then you can just easily pick it up and just throw it away and put another piece of gauze. You don't have all that gunked up paraffin under there or moisture getting all in there. It really seems to just be a no-brainer way to keep this area nice. I also have included a nice brush, so that lets you brush some extra paraffin and things off as you want it. And, you know, I made this little paraffin gallery thing out of our cover slip boxes. You know, the leftover cover slip boxes that we had, I just cut a couple of them, the top and the bottom, and made this nice paraffin catch. So, this is in here, it's tightened. If you needed to remove this for any reason, you just move this lever over, and you can take this out. And you can kind of clean the paraffin and put something, you know, clean this off. Give this a little oil if you've got that removed, just so it doesn't get rusty. You can see at some point somebody had got moisture there, didn't clean it up, and got it a little bit rusty for us. And in here I have more gauze. So, I'll put this back on. You can take that and just, since we have it all out, we'll just give it a little brush. And don't drop this, whatever you do, because it is pretty calibrated, and a little ding here will make it just simply not work and not clamp your knife good. Give it a little brush off while we got it off. If somebody's got paraffin kind of built up on the back of it, we'll just clean that off at the moment since I'm demonstrating this. I probably do this maybe once a month or so, just give it a quick wipe and take it completely off. You really want to make sure this bottom foot is aligned nicely and even on both sides. Once you see that it is, you don't want it way up here because you want to clear this. So I kind of put it more towards the back to make sure it's even, and then push this over. Again, just a little push, and that's enough. Nothing more. Here's our knife clamp release. I put the knife blade in, and then I clamp it. Again, you don't need to like crank it way over like this. And there's points in here where this is a good, nice clamp, and that's enough. You know, you can have it, it's got a little leeway for back and forth, but if you do it so tight, it actually torques the blade, and you're not going to get a good section. You kind of get a feel for that. You can move it back a little, move it forth just a little bit, and you know, again, it's got some clearance because it's an older machine, but it gives you an idea of what you need to do. If you can use this machine and learn to use this particular machine, which is quite a nice one actually, you can pretty much go to any machine in the future, newer or older, and have an idea of how it works. I have the micron level, this little gauge here in the front. I'm going to remove the blade as I'm showing you this. This little gauge here in the front is our micron level. Right now it's set at 5. 5 is good for things like, that's a little thick sometimes, but for our epidermal equivalents, especially some of the thinner ones, we've been doing it at 5 because they've got a plastic sheet on the bottom. For some reason they tend to be very wavy, and we haven't found a way to overcome that. For some reason, cutting them at 5 rather than 4 or 3 like I would like to do has helped them flatten and overcome that. I can't explain why that fully is, but that's been working and everybody's had much better results since I've done that. So even though my ribbon looks smooth, the tissue itself hasn't been reacting nicely. How you would change the micron level, there's a button in the back. I don't know if you can see this. Anyway, there's a little knob in the back. Just immediately way towards the back right.
I see it.
And you just turn that to the desired number on the thing. You know, you can get up to 30 and 40 microns on this microtome, and you can realistically with this microtome, 3 microns is about the level you're going to get. For your own information, not that you will ever have to do this, but there's a kind of a neat, nifty little way to tell that this is accurately cutting at the 3 microns. This actually has a little toothed blade, and as it rotates, the teeth push forward. Each tooth represents 1 micron. Here's the toothed wheel. Each tooth actually represents 1 micron, and over time and age, those teeth may have widened. I mean, this thing is probably a good 40 years old at least. So when you turn this handle, this thing comes around and it'll push 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you have it set at, past that number representing each micron, and you can actually really watch it push past there and count those number of teeth as it pushes it and see that it's cutting accurately at that micron level. And that's a good way to gauge it. Now, somebody, if it ever came out of alignment or the screw loosened or whatever, the mechanic that would fix this, or the equipment engineer that would fix this, would adjust this to accurately reflect the micron number there, that it pushes that number of teeth forward. This is kind of a neat way. To tell that it is accurately cutting at the micron level that you're requiring. It's kind of overkill, but it's kind of fun to know that information. Anyway, so we have ours set at 5 for those epidermal equivalents. Other tissues, you're probably going to want to have it set at 4. For kidney, renal biopsies and stuff like that, you're going to cut around the 3. For brain tissue, I recommend that you cut it at 7 or 8 microns, especially if you're looking at neurons. Okay. So I'm slowly bringing this forward, further facing the block. Now you want to do this carefully because you want to make sure that you're not up on that blade and chunk the block out. So you're bringing it forward. I'm rocking it up and down. Now some microtomes do not handle this rocking motion very well. These older ones are fine. Some of these new ones, they do not like that. Some of the new ones, they want you to do a full rotation. And you can get in that habit for yourself. Like bringing it forward, the full rotation. And I was trained and brought up with rocking it. Now you can see, you want to get the full face. Now see, if this were a sample block, if this were a patient sample block with the tissue in here, I would notice that this block that somebody gave me, I'm cutting on this left side first. And maybe I don't want to do that. I don't want to cut through precious tissue. I want to even up this block to match what somebody has done before. Now, that's where this slight knife adjustment, you don't want to do this too much. So I would lock the locking mechanism on the flywheel. And I see that it's cutting on the right side. Now this particular unit, I'm going to go over to this other one because I don't want to totally readjust this one to show you. I want to readjust that one to show you. So I don't have to mess up my adjustments on this one that took me quite a while to get to where they're at. Alright, I wanted to show you on our broken microtome. This microtome has quite a few issues, but it's a nice one just to get a feel for fooling with things and not having to use our one that's set up nicely and pretty close to established parameters. So this is a nice one. If you just kind of want to get a feel what I'm talking about, you can just play with this one since it is broken. This one, the safety lock spring is broken, and it's kind of a rare find to find another one, so I don't recommend using it. Another thing that's broken is the thing behind the chuck holder. There's a pad that holds this in place, and it's allowing it to have play no matter how much you tighten it because there's a portion of it broken. So there's more wrong with this than just that safety. What would have to be replaced would be the whole ball unit with this clamp lever. So just for your information, if somebody wanted to fool with that microtome. Anyway, for your purposes, I wanted to show you how to adjust the tilting, the angle tilts and stuff on this microtome without adjusting our good one. So you can have an idea what I mean. You have 3 knobs. I'm going to remove the blade holder on this one. You have a knob here, and there's a knob underneath. And I'll remove this chuck just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm going to totally remove it. See, if you loosen these enough, you can actually take the whole unit out. And this is what's wrong with this microtome, is this whole unit. But I wanted you to get to see what it is. And this foot is not clamping correctly with this back unit. So it needs a whole other new one of these on this. It gives you an idea of what that looks like behind all this clamp. And here's the 3 knobs I was talking about. So anyway, I'm going to put this back in. And it's really quite a simple function in what they do. I can get them all clamped back down. And it's kind of working like in a ball and pinion kind of situation. Get these all clamped. Whereas if I want to move, let's say I want to move this whole chuck holder and tilt the block to the left. In order to do that, I have to loosen this one and tighten. Well, that actually moved it to the right. So I'd have to loosen this one and tighten this one. If I want to move it, let me kind of show you that. So I loosen this one, tighten this one. That's if I'm wanting to tilt the block. Let's say this is my hand, I want to tilt the block this way, towards the right with this end coming out. If I want to tilt the block this way to the left with the right side kind of jutting out more, I would loosen this one and tighten this one. loosen this one, and tighten this one. And that moves the block face going this way. If I want to tilt the block with the top going towards the back and the bottom out more, what I would have to do is I would have to loosen this bottom one and at the same time tighten these. And you can see it's tilting the block back. Again, I would loosen this bottom one and at the same time tighten these. If I need to move the block forward, face forward more with the bottom going back, I would do the opposite. I would loosen these top ones and I would tighten this bottom one. And you can see it's moving the block face forward. Again, I really encourage you to come over and fool with this and try tilting it and adjusting it and seeing how that works and adjust your block face. You can and just see how that mechanism works. And once you have a good idea of that, then come over and use this one and use our good one. And really it should be only really minor tilting or minor adjustments on the one that we have set parameters on. If you start tilting it too much and doing too much with the block faces, you get to a point where you're actually affecting the angle at which it's going to cut, and you're really not going to get a very good ribbon. You're going to end up with a block face that's really shaved completely unevenly, and it's really a sign of a microtomist that really does not know what they're doing, and really shouldn't be microtoming if they have a block with one side really shaved and the other side not. So you really want to try to keep the block as evenly all the way around faced as possible. And the only times you're going to vary from that is if somebody gives you precious tissue sample and you want to match what someone else has already done. That's the only time you're going to make more of a drastic change to the tilt angles of this chuck. Now on these microtomes, our knife tilt angle is fixed. On newer microtomes, that knife tilt angle is not fixed, and you have some options for adjusting that according to the blades you're using and other things. And the place that you're with will have an established parameter for that. For us, our only way to tilt anything is, and really, once a knife angle is set, even at any other place, you want to keep that more of a fixed parameter and never really adjust or mess with that. You're only really going to adjust this, the actual block face itself. So I encourage you again to fool with this and get adjusted to how you would tilt that, and it's kind of nice that we have this for you to play with. Okay. So we went over adjusting that the microtome. As we see on this particular block, we're going to pretend, even though it's a blank practice block, which I'll show you when we get to embedding, you can make yourself a few of these for practicing. We're doing the facing. So I used one of my old knives that I saved for facing. And I'm rocking this side forward, and then as I'm turning the advance and retract wheel, I'm rocking the flywheel. Now, again, newer microtomes do not like this rocking motion. Newer microtomes would be better if you do the full rotation as you're advancing. Now I can see that now you can see that this is my facing knife, so it has some knife lines and it's making creases in the paraffin and lines in the paraffin because it's obviously been well used. Let me get a new knife just to show you how smooth that's going to be. I'll get rid of that one. Okay. So I'm going to back it off just a little. So newer microtomes, it's better to do the full rotation when facing. Now I can see that this particular block is wanting to go, and use forceps. Do not use your fingers to grab this paraffin. Now I can see it's cutting this left side before it's getting the right side. So what I'm going to want to do is give it a little tilt. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to slightly loosen this one, and I'm going to tighten this one. That is going to bring this right edge out a little bit more. Let's see how that works. And a little goes a long way with these things. And now you can see it's gone to the right side. And it didn't take much to do that, as you saw. So now I got a little bit of a paraffin on the bottom there to grab onto. And it's making a very nice smooth ribbon. And you know, your stroke is everything on these. This block is not even chilled or anything, so that makes a difference. So we got a nice ribbon. And then what you do with that ribbon is, I like to use a stick. So I hold on with the forceps. We got a little bit of a breeze in this particular room, so you really want to have full control over the ribbon. So you've got a breeze from the vents coming through. I moisten the stick just a little bit, and then I come up under it and I hold on to the ribbon and I bring it over to the water bath. And we get a nice ribbon of the tissue. Now I can still see the angle is slightly off for some reason somewhere. I'm either going to adjust to that, or I'm going to want to make my ribbon a little bit nicer. Maybe I'll move my knife over and just kind of see if that happens to help it. And your stroke is everything, and every tissue has its own certain fast or slower stroke that you'll want to do with it. And again, it's giving us a nice ribbon. I moisten the stick. I really don't recommend going more than 5 or 6 sections of tissue. And you've got a nice even ribbon. So maybe this knife wasn't clamping on one side a little bit more than the other. It needed that full. So just moving that a little bit helped it. Okay. Now you can practice with a blank ribbon like that without precious tissue. You can practice picking up. I'm going to use some inexpensive non-charge slides for picking up, which is not what we typically use. For picking up the ribbon, once the tissue is flattened nicely, I use these forceps. Now when I break a ribbon apart, I don't use the tips of the forceps. I tend to use this rounded edge. If you find the forceps are sticking, what you can do is you can give them a quick dip into the ice water just to make it so they're not warm and sticking to your ribbon. So I use this more rounded edge for breaking the ribbon apart. Let's say I want 2 sections per slide. I might break it like that. And then I'll take the slide in, and I'll kind of steer it slightly with light touches, and I'll hold it on the very top edge so it doesn't slide down, and I'll lift up and pick up the ribbon. Now if you watch closely, you should be able to pick up these ribbons in an exact order. Of course, this was the first ribbon I cut, but I'm not fooling with that, so we'll say that's just a bad ribbon and get rid of it. I'll wipe off my forceps so I don't have extra stuff on there. This was the second sections I cut. So I'll gently steer them onto the slide so they don't slide down, because this is a non-charge slide at the moment that I'm using. I gently touched it and I pick it up and then put it in the slide rack to drain. Again, I'm going to separate the ribbon with the ball of this, not the tip, because it tends to stick more. It just doesn't seem to do as nicely. I mean, you find your technique and your method, but you get the idea. I'll gently steer it by just light touches. Maybe touch it there so it doesn't slide down, and gently pick it up. Now on a charge slide, you can, it'll stick right away, and you cannot remove it. On a non-charged slide, if it's not positioned the way you want, you can actually unload the ribbon and redo it again on a non-charged slide. And to prevent it from sliding, you just, again, touch it slightly, and you can load it again. Let's say that was a little crooked, I didn't like that. I'm going to unload it and move it again and put it on there a little more evenly in a different position. So you can do that. On a charged slide, you don't have that option. Now, between every ribbon, I keep Kim wipes. I keep them in the drawer. We have Kim wipes. After every block or thing, I always swipe the water bath. I do that, number one, you don't want to pick up what we call floaters onto your slide. And number two, you don't want to ever take the risk of picking up another section and having two different sections from two different blocks on the same slide. So it's better to just waste a Kim wipe and every time swipe the water bath. By doing that, I just take that and I swipe it across, and then you're done and you discard the Kim wipe. You do that between every block. This little bit on the edge doesn't matter, that's not going to hurt anything, but you can take your stick or your forceps and just kind of scrape that off. And that's it. And then you can get another block. You put this in the locking mode. You lock it. You put a new block in. Now you can either take the blade out for safety reasons or as you're loading another block, but it is locked. Or you can leave the blade in. Again, you put your thumb on the face of the clamp. You push the lever forward and you put your new block in carefully. Now let's say this part of the knife, if this part of the knife wasn't giving us lines or any problems, we could still use it again. If it's giving us problems and has little knife lines or stops ribboning, it's getting dull, what you do is you release the clamp and you slide the knife down a little past there and you do it again. Release the locking mechanism, and I like to back off the blade, back it off, and then come forward again, because as the block warms up, it's going to be expanding more, and you can actually chunk your tissue out or something like that. So I back it off and then I bring it forward. I bring it forward very slowly, full turns, and when I see I'm getting close, I just watch closely. As I see I'm getting close, then I stop with the advance and retract wheel because I don't want to take a chance on cutting it, and then I just turn this faster. Maybe I'm not as close as I thought. There we go. There we go. And every time you move the blade, it slightly adjusts where you're just everything. As you can see now at this part of the blade and the way it's clamping and stuff, it's and I took the block out, so now it's a little bit different, and now it's wanting to cut more on the right side than it is on the left for some reason. Now you can leave it like that if it's not that big of a difference, but if it is and you have precious tissue, you might make that slight adjustment to change it. So in this case, I want the tilt this side to come out a little more and that side to go back. So in order to do that, in order to get the left side out a little bit more, I'm going to loosen it one little tiny loosened bit, and I'm going to tighten it here. Now I can see from top to bottom it's cutting nice and even, so I don't need to do any adjustments there. I don't need to tilt it forward or back because it's giving me a nice straight ribbon that way. And that should have made the adjustment that I needed. Again, it's better to not use your fingers to pick up the ribbon. It's better to use a forceps. And you get your nice ribbon. And you can see this is a very nice microtome. It cuts a very nice ribbon. Now, if you didn't like the stick method, you can use forceps too. I think it tends to slip a little bit out of the forceps doing it that way, but you can do it. Use 2 forceps to bring the ribbon over. And again, I wouldn't do more than 5 or 6 sections at a time, for the very reason that you're probably going to lose them because we have an air current with the ventilation here. Again, I'm going to lock this as I'm dealing with my ribbons, and I'm going to separate. I'm going to get my slide and then slowly pick up the ribbons. But we've already done that, so I'm just going to swipe them and discard those. That was just for practice. Okay, another thing you can do, if you want to see if this is cutting nice and evenly and that you've aligned it very nicely, is you can actually turn the block face over, and if it's pretty close to the same alignment, it'll be pretty close to the same cutting on this side if you flip the block over. And I can see it's still slightly off. So I'm going to adjust mine to be a little bit closer for both sides. I just want to get this lined up nicely again. I can see that it's been adjusted over time, that it's not as even as I would have liked it. So I'll give it its adjustment. And just get it back to what it was. Even though it was cutting a nice ribbon, it would be nice to have it aligned to make a really nice, pretty even block face. Okay, so I got this side kind of even. So now I'm going to flip the block again and see if it is similar. And if it's probably within a few sections of being the same, then that's pretty good. And it's pretty close. I almost would think that that's acceptable. And if I flip it again, it should be pretty close again. Maybe just a little bit, but that's pretty close. You should have a pretty even block face with that.